One of the most common questions I get asked is whether to buy an existing vending route or start one from scratch. Today, I'm breaking down the honest pros and cons of each approach with real numbers and examples from my own approach. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which path makes the most sense for you. And this will be based on how much time and money you're working with. Before we dive into this, let's actually define what is a route. A vending route ultimately is a route of multiple locations where you have vending machines that make up the route you service. So think about it. If you have an urgent care, an apartment complex, a hospital, another urgent care, and another apartment complex, those 5 locations with your micro markets or vending machines makes up one route that you service. So the overview of buying versus building a route, I'm gonna break down for you on the whiteboard, okay? So when you think about buying a route, what you're typically gonna do is you're gonna buy the route for anywhere from 0.7x to 1x multiple of total revenue. So think about it. If there's a route for sale in your town that's doing 12K a month, okay, that's probably going to be listed anywhere from 120 to 144K in value that they're going to get for it. That is going to be 1x the total value of the revenue from that route. Okay, so as a buyer, when I'm looking at a route, I'm looking at the value of what I'm willing to pay is going to be 1x or less of total revenue. If it's above 1x, I typically don't feel comfortable where the numbers actually make sense for me as the buyer. Now, let's say you don't really want to have all this capital allocated towards buying a route that you don't know much about, and you just want to build one from scratch, okay? The great thing about building a vending route with financing of machines is there's not a lot of capital requirement, but there's a lot more effort to get these locations than a route that already has the locations with the machines in them. So if you think about building a route, you're gonna have your basic startup costs. That's gonna be like your LLC or your insurance or even a marketing flyer just to go out and pound the pavement, and then your time. But the other side of this that's really good is, let's say you go to a pop-in at an urgent care or even a pet hospital and they tell you, hey, I'm ready to move forward, bring in a machine. That's $6,000 machine. You're gonna be able to finance for around 15% down. So you're looking at literally less than $1,000 to get started with building a route, but you're going one by one by one, where over here, you might start with 15 right out of the gates. So just to reiterate, there's trade-offs between both of these when it comes to time and money. Are you one of those people that doesn't have a lot of time, but you're sitting on capital to put to work? Well, you might actually think about buying a route and getting those locations at an accelerated rate because you're limited by time, not money. On the flip side, do you have a lot of time because you're just looking at a way to start a simple business that doesn't require a lot of capital or a down payment like in real estate? You might actually have the time to go start doing pop-ins with that marketing flyer and building your business with one location at a time as you go. Deciding if you're gonna buy versus build is crucial to your success, because at the end of the day, it's gonna dictate how fast or how much capital you want to put into this. So for those of you that really hate your W-2 and you're really trying to leave tomorrow, building a route is not going to be a get-rich-quick thing that's going to replace that W-2 salary. But on the flip side, if you got a lot of capital and you're really trying to get out of your W-2 right away, then think about buying that route in your town that's for sale and get all those locations locked in and learn the business right away from day one. You're gonna have the revenue that you want to feel comfortable leaving that W-2. When I think back on our route, we've done both of these options. We've bought in a couple routes. We've also built our routes from the ground up. I view it as almost like a hybrid approach. There's different times where you might have different levers of what you want to do. A great example of this is I bought a route in a remote city because I wanted to jumpstart this route while being remote. I wanted to get as many locations as possible. Where I currently live here in Oregon, we literally built it from a ground up by just going and doing a pop-in. And now that we have the infrastructure and we have the revenue from building it, and sure, it did take longer. Now we're looking at buying other locations and other routes to parlay parlay that into a bigger route. Now, let's say you're ready to make that plunge and actually buy this route that you found online. Here's one thing I would consider thinking about when you look at buying a route. Think of it just like a rental home, okay? When you go buy an investment property, the first thing you're trying to think about is what are the value adds you can do to that property or ways to make more money than it's already making. This is where I think like flipping a home is very similar to flipping a route. So a lot of routes these days that are for sale had the old school Pepsi machines, the old school snack machines. They're stocked with Snickers at $1.25 and Dr. Pepper 12-ounce cans. Well, if you buy that location, just by swapping out that old school machine with a micro market or smart machine, now you're gonna be able to swap those 12-ounce cans with 20-ounce bottles. You're gonna be able to replace those Snickers with salads. So right away, you're gonna 2 or 3x the revenue of that location by just flipping the route, okay? And so that's where I think a fascinating opportunity right now for people is to buy routes and ultimately flip them by increasing prices, putting in more expensive products, and ultimately more of these modern micro markets where you can do different things. And it doesn't have to be a Snickers, it can be condoms or a sunscreen. So a couple red flags when you're starting to evaluate these routes and ultimately flip the value of them is trying to think through what's the revenue per location. So let's say you have a 10 location route for sale and each location is doing $1,000. That's 10 grand a month in revenue. They're probably asking around 120K or 1x the yearly multiple for that route. Well, what you want to do is that location, how many machines are there? Is there an ability to increase prices? Is there ability to do newer machines? Is it a soda machine that only allows those 12-ounce cans we talked about, and now you can pull out that machine and put a micro market into it? Because now the great thing about those revenue per location metrics and why they're so crucial is you might be able to get that $1,000 at that school that has a 12-ounce can vending machine and swap it out with a micro market where you're putting $4 energy drinks or $4 protein shakes that literally only held 12-ounce cans. And that is the value of looking at the revenue per location as the key KPI when you're evaluating and doing your due diligence on what that route's actually worth. The other thing people don't realize when they're buying these routes, you might see, oh, $144,000 to buy a route? Like, where am I gonna come up with that? The beauty in buying boring businesses is the details. And what I mean by the details is there's a lot of creative financing ways, whether that's SBAs, whether that's even doing seller financing. This guy, my guess is probably 60 to 70 years old, and he's trying to remove himself from the business and live a happy retired life on the golf course. So this guy, he probably doesn't really care if he gets 144K up front. So maybe you offer him 10, 20, 30% of that 144K as a down payment, and then you're just paying that off over 5 years, the rest of the loan. There's a great example. When I bought a route in the Midwest, I literally did seller financing, put 10% down, and then I paid the rest off over 5 years. So there was minimal capital out of pocket for me to buy that route. And guess what? When I bought that route last May, it was doing 8 grand a month. Guess what it just did last month? Over 80 a month. When you think about your ROI timeline on buying versus build, this is really where you got to figure out what is ultimately your goal. Is your goal to go really fast and to be making money on day one when you start this business? If so, then buying the route path is going to be the best for you. Now, if you're looking at trying to do minimal capital, you got a lot of free time, then actually going to market and doing a lot of pop-ins and building your business through the ground up approach of building is going to be the path for you. So that's where I think for you with your ROI timelines, you got to think building a vending route is not going to be a get rich quick scheme. It's going to be pounding the pavement. You're going to do pop-ins. For every 10 pop-ins, you're going to get 3 yeses. And it's just a numbers game that's very consistent and predictable. If you want to go faster, you can buy, but it's going to require more capital than building. Now you're probably thinking when you build this route, how quickly can you become profitable? Because it is a lot of your time on the upfront side of things. And so if you think about building, one of the things I always kind of recommend is it takes about 90 days from the day you start doing pop-ins to the day your first machine's installed that you start doing revenue, okay? And think about that. When you're doing revenue, you're gonna start being profitable right away because the margins of the products, okay? And so just like I go over in some of my other episodes that you can refer back to, once you start doing sales, you're gonna be profitable. Now, the interesting thing is that down payment on your machine and getting paid back on that is gonna take a couple months. So if I was in your shoes and I wanna build a route, I would have a 12, 18, 24 month horizon frozen on my plan of profitability, ultimately because that's going to give you the time to ultimately pay off those machines early if you want to be aggressive like I do, or just the fact of scaling that route and taking that profit and investing it to get more locations, whether that's going to be through marketing and building more locations from the ground up, or buying other routes now that you've actually got under your feet with your first one. So that 90-day projections for building a route, how much money are you going to be taking home and what is your cash flow after that? That's where some simple math I love to do. Okay, so if we think about building a route, all right, when we put that machine in, let's say we finance it, that machine, let's just say for simple math, is going to be $150 a month over 48 to 60 months. That's going to be our machine payment. Then we're going to have our COGS. So if that machine's doing $1,000 in revenue, let's say our COGS is 30%. So we got $300 in COGS. Well, guess what? That machine's going to need insurance. So let's say that's $15 for insurance. Okay, there's going to be some data fees because we're going to use a smart machine. So let's just say that's 50 bucks. Okay, and then do you want to stock the machine yourself and save on labor? Or are you like me and have other people do it? Then we can do here, we got labor. So if it's twice a week, let's just say $25 an hour. So we got 2 hours a week. That's going to be 50 bucks times 4. So we got $200 in labor. Okay. So if you want to make this passive and you look at the cost, we got 500, 650, 720, 710. So you're going to be doing 290 in profit. Okay. Now let's say, hey, I don't actually mind doing the stocking. That's when you can eliminate this and then your profit's about 50%. Again, do you have more time like we talked about with building? Or do you want to go faster and you want to actually buy something? Those are the things you got to weigh when you make your decisions. When you think about buying routes, you need to think about the risks, okay? And one of the risks you got to think about is that route you're buying, how dependent is it on the seller's relationship with the client? So think about it. If you're buying this route where the seller has no contracts with the locations, they're all the seller's buddies from some good old boy club, or there's literally no paper trail that leads that location's vending machine back to the seller doing the service, you have leverage when you're negotiating. And this is ultimately the art of the deal. Because if this person wants 144K and there's risk there because they have no contracts with the locations, they have no paper trail of actually the business from a accountability and an accounting perspective, you can use that as leverage when you negotiate. In fact, what you might do, you're gonna have different tiers of what you're gonna pay over time based on the ability for those clients that he sells his route to you for stay working with you. This is why it's very important when you think about risk, not to be so owner dependent in that business or that route you're buying from that seller. Because if that seller is literally the face and has all the relationships, there's a lot of risk when that seller retires because you buy his route. So this is why for me, when we bought our route, we made it very clear that the seller had to stick around for a set period of time, take us by all of the locations, intro us to all the decision makers, be the face even after the transaction so that the locations didn't see any red flags or get alarmed that something was going on. And this made the transition super smooth for us when we bought our route. But these are definitely the risks you got to keep in mind as you start to evaluate how dependent the seller is for these locations to keep working with you when you buy his route. Another thing to think about with risk, a lot less of risk compared to what we just talked about with sellers and no contracts, but is going to be the machines. How old are the machines? Do they work? Do you have extra parts for those machines if they're older? Me personally, this is not much of a risk because I'm a huge believer in where unattended retail is going with micro markets and smart machines. So we actually, like we discussed earlier, try to take the flipping the house approach where we don't really care how old the machines are because we're going to pull them anyway and put new machines that allow us to put a lot of higher end products and a lot of incidental type items in there where we can charge more, like toilet paper or sunscreen. And so for us, we have a little bit less worry of how old their machines are. But for you guys that might not want to actually swap out machines once you buy the route and not put more capital into the route through machines, you might want to think about calculating how old these machines are, the depreciation, and ultimately what are the windows that that machine's going to keep producing for you after you buy the route. One thing you got to be careful about with regards to your due diligence process is seller misrepresentation. Let me give you a perfect example. Let's say this seller works with a hotel and has a micro market in the lobby, and the seller actually knows that the hotel is seeing how much revenue this micro market is bringing and wants to bring the micro market in-house. So the seller's trying to sell this really good location, but in reality, the location is going to bring that micro market, the stocking, and everything in-house with their employees. So you got to be really cognizant during your due diligence to make sure the seller isn't misrepresenting anything. You don't want to have any stone unturned. This is why I highly encourage during your due diligence process that you are focused on going around, meeting the clients, getting their feedback on the pros and cons of what they think about the service currently of this route, and then ultimately put all of that together with a risk calculator as part of your deal box. And then that's going to dictate how you either offer or don't offer on that route to purchase. Now that we talked about the owner reliance and ultimately owner misrepresentation risk, you might be thinking, well, shoot, I would rather just build a route. So when you think about building your route, just be very cognizant ultimately of how you're going to acquire locations. Okay, so a simple way to think about this is when I'm building my route, if I want to get 3 locations per month, okay, I need, if my hit rate is 30%, I'm going to need to do probably 10 pop-ins, okay? And so that's going to be 3 a week, a little less than 3 a week, but I always love to do pop-ins on Fridays because people are in a really good mood on Fridays. But I would need to do 10 pop-ins, and then from those 10 pop-ins and all my follow-ups, a good close rate is going to be 30%. Now, when you're starting out, you're refining your pitch. Let's say your close rate's only 10% and you want to get to 3 locations a month, then you're going to need to do 30 pop-ins, and that's going to be a lot more per week, right? Like that's going to be 7 to 8 a week. So when people are like, oh, I want to make up my 6-figure salary W-2, how quickly can I do that? I say, how quickly and how hard do you want to try? And so this is where it comes back to a true funnel game. Do you want to get 3 locations a month doing $2 grand, $6 grand total? Then you probably need to work backwards on how many pop-ins per week where you're dropping into these places. And the great thing is you don't even have to worry about, oh, well, what if they already have vending? Well, hopefully they do, because if they do, they have the old school Pepsi or the old school Coke machine where you can come in with these smart machines and play a value add. Because they already have the Pepsi or Coke machine, they're already familiar with the amenity piece of convenience. And so they know the value of convenience, but now they want a bigger value of the items that are going to be convenient to them. Once you've had these locations say yes, one of the common things I see is a lot of machine selection mistakes. And guess what? I was the corporate of this exact thing that happened. I bought our first machine off Craigslist because I wanted to save $2,000. Within 6 months, that machine broke. We had to move it out of the location and we had to buy a new one anyway. So this is where you got to factor in all the variables. When someone says, yes, we're ready to go, after your successful pop-in, you need to go through in your mind, ultimately a checklist of which machine you want to spend on. Do you want to go the cheap route where they might not have a really good back-end software, but the upfront cost is going to be a lot cheaper? Do you want to go the more scalable route where the back-end software is really good, but the upfront costs might cost more, but if you add 10 locations, you have a really good back-end software to track inventory? Or do you want to go the used machine route and buy that used machine off Craigslist or some online marketplace? These are all the things that you got to factor in for your financial situation. I definitely have my preferences. I'm never touching another vending machine from Craigslist, but everyone is different. I want to take a step back though. Even though we just talked about the risks, the pros and the cons of different machine situations, please do not buy a machine before you have a location. If you buy a machine now, that thing is going to be sitting in your garage, depreciating and losing value and not making you any money. So when you buy a machine, all comes down to when you get a yes, okay? So when someone property, some urgent care, some hotel tells you, hey, I'm ready to go, we want to micro market, that is when you buy the machines, okay? You do not buy a machine ahead of time, because too many times I've seen it where people reach out to me and say, hey, I got 4 machines. My first question is always, what is the revenue per machine? And their answer is, those 4 are sitting in my garage. So please, I'm telling you, do not buy a machine until you get a yes, and then you order that machine with the delivery address being the location of where that machine's gonna go. The great thing about buying versus building a route is both options leave you a great exit strategy. Think about it. This guy that's selling this route doing $12K a month, that's $144K in exit value. That is fascinating, because at the end of the day, whichever route you go here, you're going to have an exit strategy. For example, that route I bought last year, that gentleman was moving out of state. Well, he started that vending route with 3 locations at $8K a month, and I ended up paying him $96,000 because that was 1x the revenue, and these were prime locations. So no matter what you pick between buying versus building, you are going to have an exit strategy with either option, because there is a lot of private equity and there's a lot of investors that are trying to get into this space because the cash flow is so lucrative, so consistent, and is recession proof. I think the best thing about this whole business model, and ultimately what attracted me to it, was the whole goal of being able to get started for less than $1,000. I literally couldn't keep buying any more real estate properties because I couldn't afford the down payments, where with building my own vending route, each machine to get set up cost me less than $1,000. Think about it. That $6,000 machine that I finance for 15% down, that's less than $1,000 plus you add in the cost of goods to stock it for the first time, and you're up and running for less than $1,000. In conclusion, if you're trying to get into this business and trying to understand all the intricacies and you're not an expert in business, I would actually tell you to start small, get 1 or 2 locations, understand the ins and outs of the operation, and then you can scale it by either parlaying locations or buying routes to add to your current locations. Where if you're on the other side of this and you love to buy boring businesses and go from 0 to 100 as quick as possible, you might be able to buy one of these routes and plug in an operator that knows what they're doing, and you're going on day 1. So I think at the end of the day, if you want to start small with a little less risk, just go start talking to some of these locations, drop off your marketing flyer, and build the route from the ground up with 1 or 2 with minimal capital, and that would get you well on your journey towards financial freedom. Building with 1 or 2 locations is exactly what I did. My personal journey was to learn things with these 1 or 2 locations and then ultimately scale through acquisitions, because by that time of scaling through buying, I had already learned all the things I needed to know from an operational day-to-day standpoint of what that scaling would look like. So my personal journey and my personal preference is get your feet wet and know what you're getting into, and then scale it to bigger and bluer skies. If you found this video helpful and you want more hands-on support from our team, I've got something for you. We're opening up more spots for our Vendingpreneurs community, where you get real-time coaching on starting and scaling a vending machine business. And on top of that, our team will actually go ahead and help you negotiate with locations to place your vending machines. So even if you're brand new and not sure if this is going to work for you, we have you covered. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out the link in the description below. Thanks for watching. Mr. Passive signing off.